Why is the FBI after me? I thought I did do my taxes. Well, I'm now on the run from the FBI. That's just fucking great. Man. Wait, what are you guys doing here? Oh, I see you want me to talk about more canceled movies, do you? Okay, well, we know you're out there! Canceled movies? If we ignore the stuff that I'm dealing with, canceled movies are, an interesting concept where, man, this must be really suck that these things never exist. Which, yeah, it sucks that, some people put their heart and soul into a movie and yet again it doesn't even work, but I don't know, maybe it is interesting to see what could have happened and, just see what could have happened. So, I don't know, let's just talk about it, I guess, more. The first of this new batch is the canceled Sony Pictures animation movie Popeye. In March of 2010, it was reported that Sony Animation was developing an animated Popeye film with Aviorad producing. In November 2011, it was announced that Jay Sherrick and David Wrong, the writers of The Smurfs, would be writing the film. In June of 2012, Genndy Tartakovsky was set to direct the movie. And then it was planned for many release dates like September 26, 2014, and sometime in 2015. In September of 2014, there was an animation test footage that was released online to hopefully, get it made. Hopefully. However, in March of 2015, despite the test footage getting some good reviews, it was no longer being made, and Genndy Tartakovsky was no longer working on the project, instead working on Can You Imagine, which was also cancelled. Although some people would believe that, that some people believe that, that the movie was cancelled for the Emoji Movie, I honestly don't think so, to be honest. However, an animatic for the entire movie was leaked in July of 2022. However, Sony made sure to get rid of it everywhere. But if you are lucky, maybe it could be online somewhere. Next is Fantasia 2006. The third film began development in 2002, which doesn't make any quite sense when Fantasia 2000 wasn't the best at the box office and only got mixed reviews from the critics. But I guess Disney was willing to try Fantasia again. Some of the segments that were included were Destino, Lorenzo, One by One, and The Little Match Girl. However, it was cancelled in 2004 for unknown reasons at the time, but I think it was probably due to the box office underperformance of films released around that time by Walt Disney Animation Studios like Treasure Planet, Brother Bear, and Home on the Range. However, all of those segments that I mentioned, they would eventually get released either during the film festival seasons or on DVDs with some movies. Next was a planned third LEGO Movie spin-off called The Billion Brick Race. In March of 2015, it was announced that Warner Brothers would make a third LEGO Movie spin-off, and it was originally planned for a release date of May 24th, 2019. And it was announced that Drew Pearce and Jason Segel would be announced to be the directors and the writers. But Drew Pearce left in August of 2017, and his role was replaced by George R. Rodriguez. But then, in February 2018, Rodriguez left the project, declaring it a failure. So then, in December 2019, concept art of the characters were announced. And then going back a bit to 2018, it was announced that due to the box office failures of the Lego Movie 2, the second part, and the Lego Ninjago movie, it was announced that that movie is no longer happening. So, yeah. But in July of 2022, George R. Rodriguez stated on Twitter that the two leads would have been voiced by Diego Luna and Emma Stone, and he would have included elements of time travel and maybe even the appearance of the creator of Lego, Oral Kirks Christensen. I think that's how you pronounce his name, I guess. I don't know. Next is Free Cat, which was a movie that was supposed to be released by Disney. And the plot of this movie would have been about a cat named Oscar trying to clear his name when a neighbor's pet was kidnapped, and he's the main subject. So the cat named Oscar tries to clear his name and find out who the real culprit is. The movie began production in 2004 underneath the directors of The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, and Treasure Planet, John Musker and Ron Clements, and they did quite get a few things done. However, in 2005, David Staten, the then president of Walt Disney Feature Animation, he refused to greenlight the project because it was like too much for the kiddos. Because how do you promote a movie so serious from a Disney film? How do you do that? Next is Medusa. In June of 2014, it was announced that Sony Pictures Animation was making a film called Medusa, which would have been about a random teenager being jealous by a goddess, so she was turned to Medusa and she has to find a way to not be Medusa. And it was directed by Lauren Faust. However, in November of 2015, it was announced that Faust would be no longer working on the project since she lost touch with Sony Pictures Animation, which she stated, I very much enjoyed my time at Sony Pictures Animation and was extremely excited about the progress of our team working on making Medusa. But as it happens to so many studios with so many projects, we ultimately ran into creative differences on the direction of the project. I don't know if Medusa has been shelved, but I am no longer working on it or on Sony. But then, in March of 2019, it was announced that, yep, it's done, no more. But then, sometime in 2020, I forgot, James Baxter actually released an animatic of a scene featuring Medusa. Or is it more of an animation test? I don't know, but 2D looks great for that movie, you should look it up. Next is a movie titled Driftwood, which would have been made by Cartoon Network, and the plot would have been about a forest civilization dependent on toxic fuel source ran by an evil organization, something along the lines of that. A person named Clover, a tiny mouse-like creature, must race across the stars to find Driftwood, society's last free city, which may have a sustainable fuel source for the future of the galaxy. But the villain, Thorn, just want to stop it. And the project was announced to be the project was announced in May of 2022. 1 month later, on the other hand, David Zaslav became the main person in Warner Brothers after their buyout from Discovery. And then in September of 2022, sometime a few months later, it was one of the movies that were canceled alongside Scoop Holiday Hunt and Batgirl. Which sucks because this would have been like something cool and original from Cartoon Network, but recent stuff with them is it's not doing great with Cartoon Network. Let's pray that they're still okay. Next is Frog Kisser, which was actually going to be a live-action animation hybrid made by Blue Sky Studios, and the plot would have been about a princess named Anya who had an unfortunate ability to break curses with a magic kiss. But when her evil stepmother's new husband, her evil stepfather, tries to take over the kingdom, Anya goes on a rush with her unlikely companions, including a talking dog and a thief trapped in a body of a nude and a mischievous wizard. The princess embarks on a quest to save the kingdom and uncover her magical potential. The project was announced in 2016, and it would have had songs with Benji Peleski and Justin Paul, and there were several studios that were interested, including 20th Century Fox, and they were the distributor of the movie. And Nate Hopper was originally supposed to be directing the film, and Michael McCullers being the screenwriter of the movie. However, as time went, something came up. Disney bought out Fox in 2019, and then in April of 2021, Blue Sky Studios was shut down by Disney, which unfortunately left the project cancelled. Next is Plants vs. Zombies. Originally, it was pitched to DreamWorks Animation like in the 2000s, but then it was never picked up for some strange reason. And the concept art you see here, it would have been cool, man. Come on. But then, luckily, in April 2015, it was announced that a Plants vs. Zombies animated film would be in development at Warner Brothers. And Roy Lee was attached to be a producer of the movie alongside the production company Vertigo Entertainment. And then Warner Brothers was announced to be planning a plot for the film in an interview in May. Unfortunately, we have no real reason why it was canceled. It was just canceled. We don't know why, but it was just canceled. So, yeah. The next movie is Sly Cooper, announced to be the next project after the 2016 Ratchet & Clank movie. Unfortunately, due to the box office failure of the 2016 Ratchet & Clank movie, the movie was never released. And there is a trailer of some sorts that said that the movie would be released in 2016, but you know how Ratchet & Clank went. So this movie was unfortunately canceled. Next is a movie called Larrikins, which would have been about some animals in the Australian outback, and would have been made by DreamWorks Animation. In June of 2013, Tim Minchin was attached to compose some songs and the score for a movie called Larrikins, a original concept by Harry Chips. And the project would have been about a Bilby named Perry who leaves his home under a rock to go on a road trip with a music band in Australia. In 2016, it was announced that Tim Minchin and Chris Miller would be attached to direct the film, while they actually got some pretty interesting people to voice act, with Margot Robbie, Hugh Jackman, Naomi Watts, Rosie Byrne, Ben Mendelsohn, Josh Lawson, and everyone's favorite, James Corden. In 2017, it was announced that Tim Minchin that on his personal blog that the project was canceled, stating that I've recently been working on 3 different contendants, missing my kids a lot, sleeping a little, and not playing piano enough. And then a couple of days ago, the animated film to which I've dedicated the last 4 years of my life was shut down by new Studio Excecutives. We'll talk about that in a second. The only way I know how to deal with the important fury and sadness is to subject matters of the public to the spectacle of me getting drunk and playing ballads. So, yay! And as I was saying, when DreamWorks was bought out by Universal Pictures in 2016, the film was canceled and written off for acquisition expenses for DreamWorks for some reason. And Illumination's Chris Meledandri was also consulted by Universal executives before the cancellation for some reason, I guess. However, some of the characters would be used for a 2018 animated short film called Bilby. And then also the cancellation for the movie caused a huge thing called Revive DreamWorks Lurkins Movement on Twitter, of all things. And then, yeah, that's all. And then the reported budget for this movie would have been like $90 million. And also, I do want to mention this. This would have been DreamWorks' first musical since The Prince of Egypt, which would have been cool. Unfortunately, they got rid of this for Talking Trolls. Yay. Next was a sort of adaptation of the Nickelodeon series Are You Afraid of the Dark? In November 2017, it was announced that the Nickelodeon series Are You Afraid of the Dark would be made by Nickelodeon Movies and Paramount Players, and it would have had a release date of October 11th, 2019, and the film would have been written by the It writer Gary Dupperman, and being produced by Matt Kaplan, and being directed by DJ Carso. However, in February of 2019, Paramount removed the film from its release schedule, and we don't really know what happened to the movie actually. But it might have been changed to the mini-series on Nickelodeon that was also released on TV on October 11th, 2019. So, I guess that counts for something. Next is the Addams Family movie. In March of 2010, it was announced that Universal Pictures and Illumination Entertainment was going to be making a stop-motion animated film based on the Charles Addams drawings. And then Tim Burton was also announced to be a co-producer and potentially be a director. Ooh. And the plot of the movie would have been about like the 2019 film, but, with stop motion. However, production of the movie halted in July of 2013 with no clear reason, but then Universal lost the rights to the Addams Family, so, MGM decided to make their own movie with that script, I guess. Who knows? Next is Obi-Wan Kenobi, a Star Wars story. Yeah, strapping folks. In February 2013, the Disney CEO Bob Iger announced that development of several Star Wars standalone spin-off films were announced. And Obi-Wan Kenobi won a poll by The Hollywood Reporter in August of 2016 that, yeah, he definitely deserved a spin-off film. In May of 2018, the film was reportedly titled Obi-Wan, a Star Wars Story, and the plot would have been about Obi-Wan protecting a young Luke Skywalker on Tatooine, and, about a bunch of other stuff too, I guess. I don't know. Production on the movie was originally scheduled to be taking place in Northern Ireland in the beginning of 2019, but at Paint Hall Studios in Belfast once production of the final season of Game of Thrones was completed. Unfortunately, before they could start working on that, Disney canceled a bunch of Star Wars spin-off films due to the box office failure of Solo: A Star Wars Story. And yeah, sure, it was canceled, but thanks to a little TV show called The Mandalorian, the Obi-Wan movie was changed into the Obi-Wan show that everybody, quote unquote, loves, I guess. Next was Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 4, not the Andrew Garfield Amazing Spider-Man movie. In 2007, Spider-Man 4 entered development for a release date of May 6, 2011. And it would have also been released in IMAX, if you were wondering. And there were also a fourth and fifth film planned at the same time, I think. And for Spider-Man 4, Sam Raimi was announced to be returning to direct the movie, and Kirsten Dunst and Tobey Maguire and some other cast members to be reprising their roles. And then in March of 2019, Sam Raimi said that the fourth film is in development at the time. If there was fifth and sixth films, they would be a continuation of each other. And then since Raimi was unhappy with Spider-Man 3, he said he wanted Spider-Man 4 to be, quote, the best of all of them and end on a very high note. And then a bunch of stuff happened. There was originally supposed to be a Venom film that I'll probably talk about later. And then Raimi also expressed interest of adding Kurt Connors to be the Lizard. Then in December of 2009, John Malkovich was in negotiations to play Vulture, and Anne Hathaway would be Felicia Hardy, also be Black Cat. However, there were some things going on with Raimi and Sony. Like, they wanted the film to be shot in 3D, but Raimi kind of didn't want to. And Sony was acting off because, it just would have been. Sony just wanted to be stingy about it, I guess. And then, unfortunately, in January 2010, Sony Pictures announced that Spider Man 4 was cancelled due to Raimi's withdrawal of the project, and reportedly ended his participation because he doubted that he could make that May 2011 release date. So then Sony decided, let's do a reboot, I guess. And yeah, I'm pretty sure all know what happened from here, so we're just gonna move on. Next was the planned sequel to the 2018 Tomb Raider movie, Tomb Raider Obsidian. Before the release of the first film, Alicia Vikander, the main actress for the Tomb Raider movie, expressed interest of returning Lara Croft for a second movie, and if there is an audience out there to reach it, then I would love to. In April of 2019, Amy Jump was hired to write the script for a possible sequel, with Vindicator attached. In September of 2019, Ben Wheatley, Jump's husband, signed on to direct the sequel with a planned March 19th, 2021 release date. And then Warner Brothers decided to drop out of the project, so it was mainly up to MGM to, do the movie. And it was announced that filming would start in early 2020 in England. And then it was also later stated that it would have been scheduled to start in April of 2020, with several countries, including England, South Africa, Finland, and China. Unfortunately, a month later, there was a little thing called the COVID-19 pandemic, which production was delayed, with filming in England and South Africa, and the movie was removed from MGM's release schedule. But then, in January of 2021, Misha Green was signed on to replace Jump and Wheatley as the writer and director, with the latter moving on to direct Meg to the Trench with Warner Brothers. And the film would have been released in theaters with MGM and a distribution and marketing joint venture with United Artists Releasing, and internationally with Warner Brothers Pictures, even if I thought they already left. In May of 2021, Misha Green confirmed that on her Twitter that she completed her first draft of the script with the working title Tomb Raider Obsidian. In July of that same year, Vikander told Collider that the sequel was still not yet to be made, but it has not been greenlit. In September, also in that year, Green responded to a fan question about the status of the film on her Twitter, indicating that she was still set to direct her own script. However, strangely, in July of 2022, it was reported that MGM lost the film rights to the Tomb Raider franchise after the window in which to give the sequel the green light ran out, culminating in the lady's actress departure of the lead role. And then, I'm pretty sure MGM got them back because they got merged with Amazon, so I'm pretty sure they're going to do something with Tomb Raider, but, a canceled sequel of a 2018 movie is a go-go. Next is 1906, which, yes, it would have been about the 1906 earthquake, but more specifically, it would have been about the novel by James Delaskinko, I guess. The original concept for the screenplay came from when the author was researching the 1906 as a prequel to his 1993 historical mystery novel, Bohemian Heart, and then he pitched the concept to many production companies in July of 1988, and then it was sold to Warner Brothers Pictures. And then the estimated budget would have been about $200 million because, how do you manage to make an earthquake work in like the 2000s or whatever? But Warner Brothers wouldn't actually be alone, since they got financially backed up by Walt Disney Pictures and even Pixar, which would have been their potential first live action feature, with Pixar maybe doing some CGI stuff, I guess, who knows. And it would have been their first collaboration with Disney and Warner Brothers since the 2006 film The Prestige. That one? The one that was directed by Christopher Nolan. Sometime later, Brad Bird was announced to be the director of the movie. However, he paused work on the movie because he was approached by Pixar management, says that, there was a movie that was also going on that had some problems at Pixar. It was called Ratatouille. Then after doing Ratatouille, he signed on to the project in March of 2008, which at the time, Warner Brothers were reserving all sound studios available for their Burbank lot. But then, later that spring, Warner Brothers quietly released the reservations while Brad Bird continued writing the screenplay for the story, I guess. But in 2011, it was announced that we don't know what we're doing. So, and Brad Bird, quote unquote, said, "I don't know, it's all about getting the story to work. And the canvas is so big that it's easy to bust down its movie-sized walls and go rampaging throughout the countryside. The problem has always been scaling it and continuing it in a movie-sized length. It's really a movie that deserves to be a miniseries, but if you do a miniseries, then you have to do it for the small screen, and the story demands to be told on the big screen, so we're still working on it." And then we never really heard much of it again, except for one thing. In June of 2018, during the promotion for Incredibles 2, Brad Bird mentioned the possibility of adapting the book as a TV series, with the earthquake sequence being a live-action feature film. So I guess it couldn't count for the possibilities for this list, but oh well, what are you gonna do about it? Next is a movie titled Summer 11, and it would have actually been a prequel to Grease. In March of 2019, it was announced that the prequel, Summer 11, was in development with Paramount Players, and it would be a joint production with Temple Hill Productions and Picture Start. And John August was signed on to be the screenwriter. Unfortunately, we never heard of anything on the project for some strange reason. However, in October of 2019, it was announced that a musical television series based on Grease was given a series order to HBO Max, and then it was changed to Grease Rise of the Pink Ladies, which premiered on Paramount Plus, which was actually a prequel to the movie, I guess. And then it was released in spring of 2023, and then it was canceled and then withdrawn of the public availability in June of 2023. So if that would have been the, movie for Grease, then I'm pretty sure we found our answer there, guys. Speaking of Grease, I am kind of hungry for some food, actually. I've been eating grass for the past few days, and it's not that good. And besides, huh? What's that? Oh my god, it's a phone. I can contact a lawyer so that I can prove to everyone that I did pay my taxes. Now, the main question is, how do I get it? Okay, it took a while, but now I have a lawyer set up just in case if I go to jail. Mr. Somebody, do you want to hear the story of Gambit? No. Great, so it all started back in 2007. Gambit was believed to be appearing in the Wolverine spin-off X-Men Origins Wolverine. However, the planned person to be attached to it, Channing Tatum, wasn't ready, and he also had scheduling conflicts with G.I. Joe Rise of Cobra. And so then Taylor Kirchitz was ultimately cast in his role, and he was planning a 3-picture deal. Unfortunately, it wasn't that good, X-Men Origins Wolverine, and Kirch's performance did not make him the breakout hit that Fox executives wanted him, unless if you're Ryan Reynolds. And then in June of 2015, it was announced that Rupert Wyatt would be directing a new Gambit film that's planned for a October 7th, 2016 release. And there was a lot more things happening with that movie, and it just took a long time, and there were a lot of releases in 2017, 2018, and 2019. And then when Disney bought Fox in 2019, it was announced that Derek Fringens, who was a new director at the time, had planned no special but practical effects. And at the time, Fox delayed the film again to March 2020. But then, in May of 2019, Gambit was officially cancelled by Disney. Although it was sad that Channing Tatum never even got his own solo movie, he was actually thankfully lucky when remember what I said about Ryan Reynolds? He managed to play Deadpool in his third movie, Deadpool and Wolverine. He contacted Channing Tatum to see if he wanted to play Gambit, and surprisingly, he said yes. And that's how Gambit actually managed to be one of the better parts of Deadpool and Wolverine for some certain people. And he's actually lucky enough that in March of 2025, it was announced that he would be reprising his role as Gambit for Avengers Doomsday, which is like really lucky for him. I'm glad that it was planned to be a random spin-off X-Men movie, and then here he is, in an Avengers movie. Good for you, Channing Tatum. Good for you. The next movie is El Muerto, being a random one-note Spider-Man villain. After Sony executives saw Bad Bunny's performance in Bullet Train, they were thinking, what if we use him for another major movie? And then they quickly looked at their other franchises, and then they saw their Sony Spider-Man universe, or whatever it is. And so they decided, let's do this guy called El Muerto. And so it was announced during Sony's CinemaCon panel in April of 2022, with a scheduled release date of January 12th, 2024. In October of 2022, it was announced that Jonas Cuaron and Gareth Donnet Auclair were hired to direct the film. But Bad Bunny stated in 2023 that the film has not entered production because it was at a standstill and, it was still in development. And then the film was, postponed in June, mainly due to the 2023 writers and actors strike, and Bad Bunny going on tour, so, he's no longer available. And the film re-entered development in January of 2024 after the strikes, with further revisions to the script, and Sony intending it to be a standalone film, similar to the other Sony Spider-Man movies. However, there was one small thing that went wrong. The 2024 Sony Marvel movies, Madam Web, Venom the Last Dance, and Kraven the Hunter. Two of them bombed at the box office, while Venom was okay at the box office, but all three of them were given terrible reviews from critics and audiences. So Sony decided, we give up. So they canceled all of the projects that they had planned for the universe, including El Muerto. Maybe someday I might go through the other ones, but I don't know, maybe not now. Next is The Graveyard Book, which was actually based on a book based by Neil Gaiman. The plot of the book was about a young boy being raised by ghosts in a cemetery who they escape a brutal murder of something. I don't know why Disney thought this was a good idea, but oh well. And it was announced back in 2012. But going back a few years to January of 2009, Miramax announced Neil Jordan was signed on to write a screenplay for the movie. But then production was stalled. Miramax did some other things in the early 2010s. Disney got the things because, stuff. Henry Selick would have been the producer, Ron Howard was actually supposed to be the director, and Sean Bailey was supposed to be a supervisor. And Neil Gaitor was also producing, alongside Ben Bowing and Michael Maher. I don't know how to say that. The Graveyard Book went on Disney's schedule, announcing that in January of 2013 that Ron Howard would directing the movie, but then it was announced that they would have to rush to do that, I guess. I don't know what I'm saying anymore. But then we heard nothing for a very, very long time. Until in 2019, when Neil Gaiman was asked about the film adaptation Ever Seen the Light of Day, he stated, "Every 18 months, the same cycle has been happening, where Disney tell me that they've got a new writer on it, then a few months later they send me a script and it's okay. It's 75% of the way there. It reads a lot of the last scripts that were done, and then they tell me that they're out for a rewrite. Normally, I don't get sent the rewritten script. They just tell me, no, we don't really like it, but we've got an idea for a writer who's going to really nail this." And then a few months later, they tell me that they hired a new writer, and it begins again and again. That's what's really been happening since they bought the Graveyard Book. So, it's not really, they're not really moving forward with it. And, we did learn new things in July of 2022 when Disney announced they would be readapting the book, but with a different director, being Mark Forrester. And it was announced that Gil Neater and David Magee was to adapt the script. Then, 2 years later, in September of 2024, it was announced that production on the film was halted and then completely scrapped as the author faced allegations of sexual assault and abuse of 5 women. Seriously, what the fuck? So, because of that, we'll probably never see this movie in light again. Thank you, you dick. The next one we're going to talk about is Saw 11. In December of 2023, it was announced that Lionsgate announced that a sequel, Saw 11, was scheduled to be released on September 27th, 2024, after the shockingly good success of Saw 10, which, it would have been good. And the producer, Oren Coyles, stated that the film could possibly be a direct sequel to Saw X. Kevin Gurrt was set to return as the director for the movie in April of 2024. The release date was changed to September 26, 2025, with the original release being taken over by Never Let Go. And then it was also announced that Patrick Milton and Marcus Duquesne, who previously wrote Saw 4 and Saw 3D, made a draft of the script in mid-2024. Somehow, in March of 2025, Saw X has been reportedly stalled due to the disagreements between the producers, the studio executives, and maybe the owner of the Saw franchise, I guess. And it's like a whole thing. The movie was removed from its September 2025 schedule, being replaced by The Strangers Chapter 2, A Worthy Sacrifice. And then in June of 2025, Blumhouse Productions bought Twisted Pictures. The people that own Saw, and Lionsgate is still being involved with the thing. Next was a potential planned adaptation of Doctor Strange that would have been directed by Guillermo del Toro. In 2007, Del Toro and Neil Gaiman pitched their version to Marvel, with Gaiman writing and Del Toro directing. Their version would have been about the character being an alcoholic and a disembarked physician in the late 1920s and early 1930s, and he would have been living in Greenwich Village for 90 years without aging. And it would have been inspired by Steve Ditko for the art style, and they wanted to include the character Clea, which would have been used for Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. But then, after pitching to Marvel, they just said no. Yeah, that's basically it. Next is Batman 3, which would have actually been Batman B3, B3, Batman 3, and it would have been directed by Tim Burton once again. The plot probably would have been the same as Batman Forever, I think, or what was the one between Batman Returns and Batman Forever? I don't know, but let's not worry about that. Warner Brothers reportedly spent $30 million for Michael Keaton, but then they realized Tim Burton is not really good as a director, so they got rid of him, hired Joel Schumacher, replaced him with Val Kilmer, and, stuff, I guess. I don't know, man. Next is Alien 5, which would have been directed by Neil Blomkamp. In early 2015, it was announced that Neil Blomkamp would be directing the fifth Alien film, and it would have been a sequel to Aliens, just Aliens. It would ignore Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection, and the movie would have been taking place like 30 years after Aliens, which would have introduced Acid Sarah Hicks with Ellen Ripley and Newt as a grown woman. Then in May of 2017, it was announced that it was cancelled by 20th Century Fox for many reasons. The Alien vs. Predator films weren't that great, Prometheus was mixed, and let's not forget about Alien Covenant. So, it was no longer making stuff at Fox, I guess. Next is Boo, Bureau of Otherworldly Operations. In May of 2009, DreamWorks announced plans for a super-secret ghost project. Then later, in mid of June 2009, it was reported that they were developing the project under the working title Boo You. And Tony Leonardis was set to direct, and John Vitti was supposed to be the screenplay, and the film would have released around the end of 2012. And it would have been the story of a ghost who was bad at his job. He must return to ghost school. In August of 2010, it was reported that Seth Rogen would have been the voice of the main person. Then in September of 2012, it was announced that just Seth Rogen, Matt Bomer, Melissa McCarthy, Bill Murray, Octavia Spencer, Rashida Jones, and Jennifer Coolidge would now join the movie, now called Boo, Bureau of Otherworldly Operations. But then it was kind of caught up in between another DreamWorks movie that was working on at the time, Mr. Peabody and Sherman. So those two movies had to be swapped around most of the time. Then Peabody happened. Then Boo was originally set for a release of June 5th, 2015, but then it pulled from its release to avoid competition with Inside Out. And then in like the fourth quarter of 2014, DreamWorks Animation announced that they did a $155 million write-off because I guess they lost a lot of money in 2014 with, Rise of the Guardians, Turbo, Penguins of Madagascar, and Mr. Peabody and Sherman. So that sucks. Next is Peanuts, the comic strip, and it would have been made by John Hughes. In 1992, it was reported that Hughes would write and produce a live-action adaptation of the Peanuts comic strips for Warner Brothers. And he did previously visit Schultz in his home in Santa Clara, California, to talk about adapting Peanuts to the movies. And then, according to Variety, John Hughes was planning to start the script in Christmas of 1992 and finish it by spring of 1993. But one movie actually managed to stop everything for the Peanuts. That being Dennis the Menace. Which, although it was given pretty good reception from the audience and being a box office success, Dennis the Menace was hated by critics, so I guess Warner Brothers lost interest with Hughes' proposed idea for Peanuts, so I guess they got rid of it, I guess. Next is Bone. Two attempts, actually. The first was Paramount Pictures and Nickelodeon Movies. In the late 1990s, there was an attempt by Nickelodeon Movies, and Jeff Smith said in a 2003 interview that Nickelodeon was insisted of having Bones' cousins be voiced by child actors, and the soundtrack would have had pop songs. So Jeff Smith, the person that made the Bone comic stuff, he said no. So Paramount and Nickelodeon did not have a chance to make that. Then another version happened, this time with Warner Brothers and Warner Brothers Animation Group, or Warner Animation Group, I meant. In March of 2008, Warner Brothers bought the film rights and was confirmed in March 13th to adapt the Bone saga into a film series, with further information given on July 11th, citing that 2 scripts have already been written and rejected, while a third one is currently in the works and will most likely yield 3 separate computer animated films. In January of 2012, Patrick Sean Smith, the creator of the TV series Greek, was hired to write the adaptation, and P.J. Hogan was hired to direct the movie, and it would have been produced by Lynn Pictures and Animal Logic. In November of 2016, Mark Osborne was hired to direct the movie for Warner Animation Group, alongside his wife Adam Klein, that was supposed to be writing the movie. However, we actually don't know what happened to the Warner Brothers stuff. All we know is that in October of 2019 that it was picked up into Netflix and it was reworked into a series, and then we all know what happened to that one. So that sucks. Next was a planned Haunted Mansion movie with Guillermo del Toro. In July of 2010, it was announced that they would reboot the Haunted Mansion, with Disney and Guillermo del Toro being a writer and producer. And del Toro stated that the project would not take place in a real world setting, but more in a heightened reality. And he also said that the Hatbox Ghost would be one of the main characters. And he said the film would be scary and fun at the same time, but the scary will be scary. In June of 2011, Walt Disney World Imagineer Jason Sorrell was brought into the project as a creative consultant. In August of 2012, Del Toro submitted the final draft of his script to Disney, intended for a PG-13 rating, like the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. In July of 2013, it was announced that Del Toro was no longer being the director, but he did say that he was going to be a co-writer and executive producer. So, and then I guess something happened in between this and the other Haunted Mansion movie. I guess it got canceled and it got re-canceled. So, yeah. Next is Zack Snyder's original plan for the second and third Justice League movies. So, after Man of Steel was released in 2013, Zack Snyder outlined his DC universe, a DCEU, with a 5-film arc with Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and a Justice League trilogy. And he did write some scripts and a bunch of other stuff. Apparently, Lois Lane was died, and that's how Superman, managed to be underneath Darkseid, and it's a whole bunch of things. But the main thing is that after Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice was not received well from critics and audiences, Warner Brothers decided, actually, we kinda don't know about that. So they decided, let's try to be more colorful instead of Zack Snyder's weird stuff, I guess. And although Snyder was still trying to work on Justice League, apparently, how do I say this in a nice way? One of Zack Snyder's daughters, I don't know how to say this correctly, but Zack Snyder's daughter died, I guess. So he had to step out of the project so that so that he could take some time off. But Joss Whedon joined Justice League. A bunch of other stuff happened, and I guess because of it, I guess Zack Snyder's never got to see his original Justice League trilogy. Sure, Zack Snyder's Justice League, the Snyder Cut, did manage to get released, but what he was planning for the other movies, we don't even quite know. Next is Superman Flyby, which would have been written by J.J. Abrams, shockingly. In March of 2004, Warner Brothers Pictures was commencing pre-production on a movie called Superman Flyby, which had a target theatrical release of around June 2006, with Mick G signing on to direct, or Joseph McQuinty Nicole, and J.J. Abrams being the script. Remember, this is before Mission Impossible 3. However, they were dropped out in June of 2004 due to unknown reasons at the time. However, that same month, Bryan Singer was approached by Warner Brothers to pitch his idea for a Superman movie, and that's how we got Superman Returns, actually. So, yeah, that's how we got that. But J.J. Abrams would thankfully make Mission Impossible 3, which would start his very weird directing role, I guess. Next was Iron Man, which would have been potentially starred by Tom Cruise. There was an original potential first attempt with Universal Pictures in 1990 when they bought the rights for Iron Man to be produced by the big screen, with Stuart Gordon being directed for a low-budget movie based on the property. In February of 1996, 20th Century Fox acquired the rights from Universal, and in January of 1997, Nicolas Cage expressed interest in playing the character, while in September of 1998, Tom Cruise expressed interest of producing and starring as Iron Man. And Jim Ventar and Iron Man co-creators Stan Lee wrote the story for Fox, and a bunch of stuff happened. It would have starred MODOK as the villain. In May of 1999, Jeffrey Kane was hired to rewrite the script. In October, Quentin Tarantino was hired to write and direct the film. What? But then, in December of 2000, they sold the film rights to New Line Cinema, and the reasoning was that although Ventar's / Stan Lee's script was strong, the studio had too many Marvel superhero movies in development, so we can't make them all. Sad, I guess. Then New Line Cinema did their thing. They tried, it failed. Then Marvel decided, oh well, we'll do it on our own, and that's how we got the 2008 film. But it would have been interesting to see how Tom Cruise would have been playing Iron Man. Hopefully, with the next few Avengers movies, those dreams might come true. Maybe. Next is a planned sequel to Batman and Robin, Batman Unchained. During the filming of Batman and Robin, Warner Brothers impressed everyone by immediately hiring Joel Schumacher to write and direct another Batman movie, with Akiva Goldsman being another writer, I guess. His plan was a dark tone with the Scarecrow and Harley Quinn, and it had a projected mid-1999 release date announced. But then, there was one small problem. The shit show Batman and Robin released in theaters. Underperforming with critics and audiences, it did not go well. Seriously, it did not go well. Making Warner Brothers lose any hope with Batman, and, just canceling the movie altogether, and Warner Brothers wouldn't care about Batman until Christopher Nolan did his Dark Knight trilogy. So, yeah. Next is actually another Brad Bird movie, Brothers in Crime. In the summer of 1993, it was announced that the animation artist at the time, Brad Bird, was hired to make his live-action feature film debut with a family comedy called Brothers in Crime, with New Line Cinema being the studio behind it. And it would tell the story of a 15-year-old boy who convinces his 8-year-old brother, whom he can't stand, that he's actually adopted. Once the younger is back, he thinks he found his real parents, and the older brother has to kidnap him to take him back to his real home before their parents return to their vacation. It's kind of weird, actually, but who am I to judge? Filming was originally supposed to begin in September of 1993 with a production budget of $6 to $8 million. However, the project kept not being materializing, and Brad Bird realized, hey, wait a minute, I'm an animator, shouldn't I be directing a movie? So then they moved from New Line to Warner Brothers Pictures to make The Iron Giant. But who knows, maybe Brothers in Crime could have been good. Who knows? Next is Jurassic Park 4. Not Jurassic World, Jurassic Park 4. In May of 2001, Steven Spielberg and his production company, Amblin Entertainment, were thinking of ideas for a Jurassic Park 4, which he was planning to produce. And then the director of Jurassic Park 3, Joe Johnston, was not really interested to direct a fourth film. And then it took a while, but in 2002, William Monahan was announced to be the screenwriter with a planned release date for mid-2005, and Kathleen Kennedy would be the producer and Spielberg would be the executive producer. One of the ideas was that dinosaurs were migrating to the Costa Rican island, with Dr. Alan Grant and Ian Malkin doing a chart on an offshore island, and a bunch of other stuff happened, blah blah blah. Then there were many other drafts for the movie, which would have been set in a jungle, and then it would have featured genetically modified dinosaurs, which they would also use for like the Jurassic World movies. But then in April of 2005, the film was postponed due to Steven Spielberg's disclassified for these script revisions. And I did say postponed, not cancelled. Although it would eventually change to the Jurassic World we all know today. I don't know, I just felt like it's worth mentioning it here for some reason. Next is Shrunk, aka a reboot of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. In February of 2018, a reboot film was announced to be in development, and it would have been a Disney Plus original. In March 2019, it was changed to be a legacy sequel to the original trilogy, with Disney developing the film for actually a theatrical release, which is good. And Josh Gad was announced to be some guy named Nick Stalinsky. I don't know. I haven't seen Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and the plot would have reportedly been about Nick following in his father's footsteps and becoming a scientist and inventor, accidentally shrinking his own son and 2 daughters to 5 inches tall. In December, Joe Johnston had early negotiations to return to the franchise as the director. And in good news, in January of 2020, Rick Moranis entered early negotiations to come out of his acting retirement to reprise his role as Wayne Stalinsky. And Joe Johnston was also confirmed to be the director of the movie, with Todd Rosenberg writing the script. And it was from an original story by Josh Gad, Ryan Dixon, Ian Pefler, and Jay Ress. In February, Moranis actually signed on to the project to reprise his role. Everett Holberman and Todd Lieberman would be the producers, and it would be a joint production between Disney, Mandeville Films, and Walt Disney Studios Motion Pictures, being distributed to theaters, and principal photography was scheduled to begin in early 2020, taking place in Toronto and Atlanta, Georgia. And then in March of 2020, filming for every single Disney project was halted due to the COVID-19 pandemic. In November that same year, the new Disney CEO at the time, Bob Chapek, announced that filming on all movies that have been postponed due to the virus has been resumed. But In June of 2021, Josh Gad stated that filming has not even been started, and he was hoping that the movie would begin shooting in 2022. Then in January 2022, it was announced that Josh Gad stated that he and Rick Moranis had once again put on and collaborating in preparation for the sequel. But unfortunately, in June of 2023, Josh Gad revealed on Twitter that the project has been put on indefinitely. Technically not canceled, but although he expressed hope that production would resume in the future. So again, another one that probably kind of doesn't count. Probably still worth mentioning anyway, especially since Rick Moranis is essentially returning to Spaceballs, and if Disney is willing to put this movie back into development, who knows, maybe this one could also be good too. Next was a planned Micronauts movie from Paramount and Hasbro, and would have been directed by Dean Dubois. In November 2009, during an Investor Day meeting at Hasbro, it was announced that we're doing something with the property, and hinted that J.J. Abrams' company Bad Robots was in negotiations to produce the film. In March of 2013, it was announced that Rhett Reese and Paul Wernick mentioned that they were working on the screenplay as a possible production. And in December of 2015, it was announced that Hasbro and Paramount were planning a cinematic universe combining Micronauts, G.I. Joe, Visionaries, Knights of the Magical Light, Mask, and ROM. And several writers were announced to be working on the thing in 2016, and the movie was originally scheduled for a release of October 2020 before being pushed to June of 2021. Then, in 2019, they found their director, Dean Dubois, to be the writer and director of the movie. However, in November 2020, it was removed from the release schedule, and we never really know what happened to it. Sure, Dean Dubois did move on to the live-action How to Train Your Dragon, but who knows, maybe this movie is just dead, no more. Next up is a planned Halo movie. In 2005, Columbia Pictures president Peter Siskel began working with the studio system to produce a Halo film adaptation, with Alex Garland being to write the script. And then he pitched to many studios with people dressed as Master Chief. And Microsoft terms required $10 million against a 50% gross, which most studios passed because of a bunch of stuff. Then two studios did collab with Microsoft, 20th Century Fox and Universal Pictures. They decided to partner the film, paying Microsoft $5 million to option the film and a 10% gross, with Peter Jackson being the executive producer and Neil Blomkamp being as a director. But before Blomkamp was actually signed on, Guillermo del Toro was actually in negotiations to direct, but it never went anywhere. In 2006, D.B. Weiss and Josh Olson rewrote Alex Garland's script, and pre-production of the film was halted and then restarted several times. Then later in 2006, 20th Century Fox threatened to pull out of the project, leading Universal to issue an ultimatum to Jackson and Schnitzler about other stuff. But then, eventually, the rights for the movie reverted to Microsoft, so they barely went anywhere, I guess. Next is The Exorcist Deceiver, a planned sequel to The Exorcist Believer. In July of 2021, two sequels were confirmed to be in development at the same time, with the same people that made The Exorcist Believer being on board. The first of the sequels, The Exorcist Believer, was originally scheduled to be released in theaters on April 18th, 2025. And then in a 2024 interview with IndieWire, the director of the movie, David Gordon Green, revealed that the second film would have been set in Europe and would focus on the character Nurse Anne, played by Anne Dowd. Unfortunately, The Exorcist Believer wasn't that great, and sources claim that it was certain and that they would have to rethink the creative for the next two films, and Green has expressed doubt about his participation with the movie. In January of 2024, Mr. Green stepped down from The Exorcist Deceiver and was removed from its release schedule shortly afterwards. And then in May of 2024, Mike Flanagan was in talks to write, direct, and produce the next Exorcist film. And then he was officially confirmed to be filming a new Exorcist film later that month. And then it was announced that The Exorcist Deceiver and the planned trilogy was officially cancelled, and the franchise was being rebooted, with the first movie scheduled to be released on March 13th, 2026. Before that movie was removed from Universal's release schedule in June of 2025. And then Mike Flanagan revealed that until he finished his miniseries adaptation of Carrie, he would start beginning production on the movie. So, although we're gonna get Mike Flanagan for an Exorcist movie, David Gordon Green's originally planned trilogy of the movies did not happen. The second to last film that we're going to talk about is Ghostbusters 3 Hellbent. After the release of Ghostbusters 2, Dan Aykroyd wrote the script for a third Ghostbusters movie, and the script would have been about a parallel universe of Manhattan called Manhattan. Very creative. And at the time, Aykroyd stated that Columbia Pictures was interested through the principal actors, especially Bill Murray. But he's not. Apparently, Bill Murray was just not really interested to do another Ghostbusters movie, so they had to, change the script a few times to potentially introduce a new, younger group of Ghostbusters, and after a few years, Columbia began pursuing a sequel to Bill Murray, but Murray, who disliked sequels, was very uninterested into the project. In 2009, project has failed to progress any further. But then in January 2010, Ivan Reitman, the director of the two Ghostbusters films, confirmed that he would direct the third one. Yay! And then also in March, Murray discussed development on the film and his mixed feelings of reprising the role. And there was actually a release date scheduled for Christmas of 2012. But then in October of 2010, Aykroyd commented the screenplay by Gene Stupinski and Lee Eisenberg, saying that he was particularly impressed with writing Murray's character and the implication of the new team with the original, while he and Ramis was working on the second draft of the script. However, Bill Murray was just not really interested, since they signed a deal with Columbia back in the 80s, since they had to say that all four have to be all good at once to start making it, and Bill Murray was just no. Unfortunately, there would be one downside. In February of 2014, Harold Ramis passed away, and that left Ghostbusters in a pretty interesting thing. And the script that they did have, Ghostbusters Hellbent, was just no longer the same without him. They would have to do consistent things, and I guess Sony was just not interested in it, I guess. So they scrapped it, and they decided to work on the female version of the Ghostbusters, which everybody loves, apparently. Quote unquote, I guess. But, I don't know. I guess it could have been interesting to see how a Ghostbusters 3 with the original main four could have went. And finally, we're going to talk about the cancelled sequel to the Friday the 13th reboot in 2009. In October of 2009, Warner Bros. Pictures set a release date for the sequel to Friday the 13th of August 13th, 2010. On December 10th, however, the sequel was pulled from its release schedule and was delayed indefinitely. In April of 2010, Brad Fuller announced that the sequel for the film was just straight up not happening. In February 2011, Fuller announced that Damian Shannon and Mark Swift has finished the script for the sequel, so what did they just say? In June of 2013, Warner Brothers relinquished their film rights to Friday the 13th to Paramount. I have no idea what that word meant. In that same month, Derek Mayers, who portrayed Jason Voorhees in the 2009 version, revealed that Paramount was working with Platinum Dunes to produce a sequel on the remake. However, the sequel was later developed into a separate installment of the franchise, and then the rights was reverted back to New Line Cinema and Warner Brothers in 2018. So I'm pretty sure this movie is not even happening, especially with all the rights stuff, but I don't know, that's something, I guess, and yeah, that's all we have.
And that's all I got for this bat. We found you, you fucker! Oh, fuck. We finally got you, you bitch. Are you sure that's him? I mean, he is a well-known celebrity. That's why he keeps calling himself, because he's a sore loser. Now help me with the body. He's going to prison and staying in prison. Is that you?